Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Game Geezer here. I had some questions on some overclocking stuff, so I decided to test all of the different methods of overclocking in BIOS, preset profiles that ASUS left, Windows overclocking, manual overclocking, and kind of just share some results on that. I even made a video here. It's a little over an hour long. It's an hour and 13 minutes. And I'm going to upload that too. It's called Different Overclocking Methods, and you can watch what I was doing when I was getting these results if you're interested in that. But the point of this video is to get straight to the point and just share my results with you, which is the important part. If you already know how all this works, then this is the only part that's going to matter for you. I didn't do any fancy graphs or anything, but I did write all my stuff down, and I'm going to go through that as well. So let's get started on that. First of all, I was using a 7700K with a X62 Kraken on a Z270 formula from ASUS. So just keep that in mind that this CPU has been delitted and relitted for all these results. So anyways, let's get started. So out of all my results, the best results were my manual overclock that I did myself. And the manual overclock, you can see I wrote it down here, is my best one. It's perfectly stable at 5 gigahertz, 1.3 volts. The RAM is configured perfectly at 2933, 1.35 volts with a 0 AVX offset. This is my how I run daily on my computer. Really good cool temps. It gave me some of the best benchmarks. I don't have any power save mode or anything like that, or any like 2 different variable voltages or anything when I'm not using it. I just always have it on max all the time, or what I consider max is 5 gigahertz for my PC. This is my favorite overclock, and you have to do it manually to get this kind of result. It only goes up to 56C max under load, and it's just my favorite overclock that I have. Everything is just great on it, and no matter how hard I stress it, it only goes 56C. And if you're interested, I have a video called The Perfect 7700K Tune, and you could see just how far I stress it, and it only hits 56C. It's a pretty insane video. Just for fun, I have another manual overclock that I do in the BIOS, and I call it Max Power Overclock. It has a 0 AVX offset, and it runs at 5.2 at 1.45 volts, and it has a cache ratio of 4.7. I forgot to mention my cache ratio on my 5 gigahertz is 4.5. I keep them roughly 500 megahertz away from the clock speed there, so that's how I came up with that number. So you can see I got the RAM set here also manually 2933, 1.35 volts. Good temps. The thing with this overclock is, like I'm saying here, it's not good for daily use because of the high V-core, which runs at 1.45. And this is a mostly stable overclock. I can run 2 benchmark, like 2 Cinebenches or an ASUS Real Bench by itself, and it'll pass all that. To make this more stable, I need to bump up the voltage some more, possibly a little bit higher, like 1.46, 1.47, maybe even 1.48. And that is a lot of voltage, but if you see here in my notes, the max voltage you can set the 7700K to is 1.52 volts max. That's in the ASUS PDF, I mean not ASUS, but Intel PDF folder on this specific CPU. It is a Skylake refresh, and Skylake is also the same. So these can have a absolute maximum of 1.52 volts. Obviously you don't want to go any higher than 1.4 if possible. So that's why I don't like my 5.2 overclock as much as my 5.0, because you can see my 5.0 is a 1.3 volts and significantly lower. And I can actually drop this to a 1.28, but to make it past my insane benchmark, 1.3 is what's needed. So to make my 5.2 pass my insane benchmark, it's going to need at least probably a 1.46 1.47 or 1.48, maybe even 1.5. But I can make this CPU run stable with manual overclock. And you can see here I left a note. I could run this probably daily if I put an AVX offset of 2 and just bump the V-core up like I suggested a second ago. So anyways, let's keep going. So also in the BIOS, I know a lot of people were asking me like, hey, what about auto overclocking? Because a lot of people don't like messing with the settings. So what I would say to you, out of all the results that I got, the best auto overclock was in the BIOS with mode TPU mode 2. The only difference between 1 and 2 is 1 is made for fans and 2 is made for water cooling. So it gave me an auto overclock of 4.8 gigahertz on cores 1 through 4 at 1.35 volts. It's 100% stable, and it gave me a cache ratio between 4.2 and 4.4. One time it gave me a 4.2 and one time it gave me 4.4. I don't know why, but I just thought that was worth mentioning. It also automatically set my RAM to 2933 at 1.35 volts with a 0 AVX, which was great. So this is about a 17% overclock, and this is what that mode looks like in BIOS. Hey, this is what that mode looks like in BIOS here. TPU, and you have 1 and 2, and you can see it gives you a description there. So that's what that's about. So moving on to the Asus EasyTune Wizard. I did not like this one as much. My favorite was still the TPU mode 2. And the Asus EasyTune Wizard, on the water setting, did okay on the daily overclock, but it struggled on the media overclock. It has 2 options in there. So like if you're in BIOS, it'll be up here, like up in the top, Easy Tuning Wizard. And it'll show you something like this when you click on it. And this stuff here is kind of weird, the way it wants to clock everything on its own. It does a good job on the CPU, I mean relatively good, but it's just not stable because even when it asks you about XMP, it doesn't matter if you push yes, it doesn't matter if you push no. It enables XMP, and it causes issues for instability with my RAM because my RAM is not going to run at DDR4 3000. It'll only run at 2933. At least from what I've seen, stable on all my benchmarks. So it keeps activating XMP, and that causes an issue for me. If your RAM is actually hitting what it's supposed to, this isn't going to be an issue for you. It's not going to cause an issue. But for me, this needed adjustment. So the CPU is fine, and the overclocks came between 14 and 17% with 0 AVX. But again, I had to go back and adjust my RAM settings. So the EasyTune Wizard was not ideal for my scenario. Still, TPU mode 2 came in above everybody. The way to beat TPU mode 2 was with my manual overclock. I got the best results doing that, but these are the auto clock features we're talking about now. Both of these are in BIOS, the EasyTune Wizard and the TPU mode 2. Let's talk about the next one, the Asus preset profiles. So let's talk about those. So we got preset profiles here in the BIOS, and the home page here, or basically under Extreme Tweaker. You'll see one, it's going to sit right in front of you. It's called Overclocking Presets, and it's real easy to miss it because it just doesn't stand out a lot. But it's right in front of your face, basically. And these are presets made by Asus specifically, and they're pretty interesting as well. So you get there's 2 in particular I was interested in these presets. There was one called Gaming Mode and 5 gigahertz preset. Now on the gamer one, you can see it looks something like that. It was number 1, Load Gamer Overclock Profile. and this one was a little weird. It did do good. It set the voltage between 1.35 and 1.38, 0 AVX, but on the cores, it adjusted them manually per core. So the first two were 4.8, and then 4.7 and 4.6 for cores 3 and 4. It runs cool and it does gaming quite well, but it kind of sucked for me because it also enabled XMP and set my RAM to DDR4 3000. So again, I had to go back and change those settings to make this work. The 5 gigahertz profile looks something like this. It's in the same page there. And as you can see here, it says this profile allows you to easily overclock the 7th generation K series. So this only works for the K series. But what's really cool is that Asus tested about 1,000 7700Ks, and that's how they came up with this profile. Now, what I like about the 5 gigahertz versus the gamer profile is the preset for the 5 gigahertz does not affect your RAM settings at all. It just gives you the 5 gigahertz multiplier and then leaves your cache ratio at 4.2. And just focuses on adjusting the CPU and the auto voltages to where it'll run 5 gigahertz. It does get good temps, but it could be lower and better temps if you go back and adjust the vCore yourself. Also, something worth mentioning in the gamer overclock profile, it gives you a 4.4 cache ratio on its own. So that's kind of interesting. So now we're going to be going into overclocking in Windows with Windows software and talking a little bit about that. So we're going to be talking about the Asus AI Suite 3, or Suite 3, whatever you want to call it. It looks something like this. And this one is pretty interesting. It comes with the Asus motherboards. You can just download it from the site if you don't have it. There's a mode in there like this when you do when you let it do the intelligent processor, and it's got TPU 1 and 2, and it's got a whole bunch of settings in there that it goes down, fans and all that stuff, and it just tries to overclock the best it can. Now it can overclock two ways. It can overclock all 4 cores together or per core. And I did it both ways on TPU mode 2 with extreme tuning and all that stuff to get the best results. And what ended up happening is I didn't like it that much, honestly. The first one I ran, the all-core bench, it did very poorly. It only came in at a 14% and then once again at a 15% final conclusion when it finished overclocking, which is weird because it did reach an overclock of 23%, but when it was finally finished, it just dropped it back down. And I don't know why. It also set my RAM settings off to 2966 because it did a multiplier of 50, but it was doing like, instead of 100 even, it was doing like 101, 102, 103. And I don't know if my computer would be stable running RAM this fast or not. I've never tried it. And the fan curve, I didn't appreciate the fan curve that it set for me, and I think that was mostly because I have a fan splitter, and that was probably causing issues. So I just really didn't appreciate that, the way it came out there. Now when I ran the test again as a per core bench, it did pretty good. It gave me a 21% overclock, but the voltages were anywhere between 1.38 and 1.42, which is kind of high. And it did that wonky thing where as it's overclocking, when it hit failure, it came back and continued to overclock some more, but in half increments instead of full increments. So my cores 1 through 4 look something like this, like 5.05, 5.05, 4.95, 4.95, like stuff like that. And it gave me some weird RAM settings somewhere around 2966, and basically just set my RAM basically just right under 3000 with these weird settings. So it did run, but like I post here, there's possible stability issues from the RAM settings being raised. And again, the temps were okay, but could have been better with lower vCore. So I really didn't care too much for the Asus AI 3. doing it. I mean, it did really good, especially if you're kind of a noob to this kind of stuff. It's going to give you a good overclock, but you're going to probably run into some issues if, if it adjusts your RAM incorrectly or things like that, or possibly have higher temps because the higher voltages it's setting. So the best one for in Windows software is this one here. It's the Intel Extreme Tuning utility, and it looks kind of like this when it's open. And the thing I like about this is how simple and laid out it is when you're in here. You got your cores 1 through 4, the multipliers, the cache ratios, the offset, the power limits. It's all right there. This software is really good, and it's really easy, and I really like it. But the thing is it only controls the CPU, doesn't control RAM or anything, which sometimes that's a good thing. And it also is worth mentioning it has a built-in benchmark and stability test. I wouldn't rely on the stability test with that program, but it's cool that it has it. So basically, y'all are probably wondering what the conclusion is to all this. And basically my conclusion that I've came to after testing all these different ways is that the manual overclock is still top dog, because simply it's just all in your control, and you can get your RAM and processor settings perfect so you don't have stability issues. The only cons to it are it takes time, obviously, because you got to dial in your perfect tune, but it's still the best way. The second best way for to have an overclock done, I guess the best way that I wrote it here, to have your PC overclock for you, from my testing in my particular case, is in BIOS use TPU mode, either 1 or 2, because first of all it was quick and it was very accurate. It got my RAM right on the head, and it got my CPU pretty good. It got my CPU to a 4.8, which you could push it more, but I mean, for just hopping in there and just clicking run and it just doing one little test and then rebooting, and then it's got good settings. TPU 2 mode was my favorite as far as having it do it for me, even though with the AI suite it gave me more power. I just didn't like the numbers it was showing me, or the way it was adjusting fans, or the way it was wanting to do digipower and all that stuff to be more power efficient. I just didn't like it. So my favorite auto overclock was TPU 2 mode, and my best overclocks were my manual ones. So if you were going to ask me what's the best way to have your computer overclock for you, I would say use TPU mode in the BIOS, and you'll get a pretty good stable setting that way. It gave me a vCore on that of 1.35. It gave me good temps. Everything just worked. All the other profiles and overclocks that I used pretty much had a problem because they were using XMP or trying to use XMP, and it was configuring my RAM settings too high and just going to cause an error with stability. So the only ones that didn't do that was the Intel Extreme Tuner, and the Asus preset 5 GHz profile didn't activate XMP. Those were fine, but the rest did, and that's why I'm telling you the things I'm telling you. So if I was going to tell someone some advice, it would be to use the TPU mode in BIOS and just forget everything else. Or at the very least, just keep the Intel Extreme Tuner and just adjust your CPU that way. And then you won't have any issues with your RAM instability or anything like that. It'll just focus on your CPU, because RAM speed isn't a big deal, and you don't want that causing stability issues. So TPU mode is very good automatic overclocker, and you don't have to install any crap on your computer. But the manual overclock obviously gave the best results, but it takes time. You got to play with your voltages and stuff. So I also wrote a page here what I recommend if you're going to try a manual overclock. I'd recommend that you focus on just CPU speed first and squeeze out what you're comfortable with. Get a good speed, and then after you get a speed you're comfortable with, try adjusting your voltage and testing for stability. And when you find something you're happy with, play with your cache ratios. And then when you're done with that, try to find your lowest stable vCore that you can under a super heavy stress test, because you want to find a voltage that can handle whatever you throw at it, basically. So you want to have a good speed, but a voltage that's high enough that the CPU won't cause a Windows crash. And when you find that, you're set. And then after you're set there, just play with your cache ratios. Be sure that in Windows, performance mode is activated. You don't have power save mode on. And also be sure in your BIOS settings that you have it set to performance, and turn all that power saving crap off. You don't want that. I also found that Powerline 5 mode in the BIOS settings was the best for the 7700K. And after you're done with all those and you got everything straight, tweak your RAM speeds and your RAM voltages, which for me is 2933 at 1.35 volts. And then you'll know if you have any issues, it's your RAM, not your CPU. And you can go adjust that accordingly. I also have a side note here that if you get a blue screen, it's a CPU error. If your screen is still on but it freezes and you have noise coming out of the speakers, that's a RAM error. So that's just something that you can pay attention to. And then on top of all that, if everything looks good and you don't have high temperature warnings, then basically congratulations, you've got a successful overclock. So this is a summary here of just the different benchmarks for the questions I was getting asked. So basically to recap, manual overclock is the best. If you want something that's going to overclock for you, I recommend TPU mode 2 in BIOS. TPU mode 1 may be just as good as TPU mode 2, but I know it's going to probably clock you down a little less because it's made for fan cooling, not water cooling. But it gave me the best results that I've seen on its own. So I really recommend TPU mode 2. And everything else is just kind of eh. The Intel Extreme Tuning Wizard, this program here, is pretty good for just adjusting your CPU settings inside of Windows. Like if you want to bump up your cache ratio instead of like booting back into BIOS just to run another benchmark or something, it's pretty cool for that. So that's pretty much that. I also made you guys that hour-long video where you can watch me do all this if you want to see it for yourself. And I just am going to cut the video here. I'm trying to make it short. And basically this video is just all about the results and what to expect. And then the video there is just if you want to see it in action and kind of maybe learn some stuff or just see how I did it or whatever. So anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. It took a long time to put all this together, so you know, yeah, I appreciate the support. If you are new and you just subscribe or something, that'd be great. I just wanted to make this video for some of the YouTubers who are asking me questions about computer stuff, like Stress Tech, I know is one of them, and you know, let you guys know that I appreciate the subscribers and all that, and that even though it took me a long time to put all this together, it was worth it. And anyways, hope you enjoyed that, and have a good one.